Hi, and welcome back to my series on simple flies that I catch most of my trout on. I'm Raj Kletke, and today we're going to take a break from the tiny flies we've been tying in this series. We'll be tying and fishing the Minke, which is the name that it was given by the fisherman that first gave me one of these to try. We're just going to be using still photos today. I've already tied this fly in part 4 of my simple entomology series, so if you wish to review a video of tying the Minke, you can look there. I tie practically all my Minkies on a size 14 straight hook, relatively huge after I've been tying the tiny 24s and 26s for a while. I don't even need my magnification for these. I usually use a 1X heavy hook, but a standard dry fly hook would also be fine. Having your weight wire on a bobbin greatly speeds up wrapping multiple hooks. I use an old cheap bobbin. The same flared tip that was cutting my thread works great for cutting off the soft wire smoothly at the front of the hook shank. Some use pontoon weighting of the hook. I don't. I start at the back of the hook and reverse wind .020 lead-free round wire on the hook shank for weight. The front of the wire has been cut smoothly with the bobbin tip. The back end of the wire weight is going away from me, so wrapping my thread in the normal direction tends to tie this down rather than lifting it up, which speeds up anchoring the weight in place. Try it and you'll see what I mean. Some will glue the weight in place. I just anchor it with thread. Start the pink, salmon, or even orange-colored thread at the front in the usual fashion and anchor the weight in place with several parallel thread bands. Then partially wrap the weight. Don't worry about completely covering it with thread yet. Use your debarbing pliers or other pliers to flatten the weight vertically. This will give a broad dorsal and ventral surface. I believe the flattening was done originally as scuds and sow-bugs have flattening. This may not be needed, but I like to do this as I think the flattening may help cause a slight wobble, which may be of value as micro-movement. Taper the ends of the weight by using your pliers and wrapping thread. Cover the rest of the weight with your thread now. I doubt a tail is necessary, but traditionally this fly has a wood duck or fake wood duck tail. I'll be using this fly on bright sunny days, so sometimes I like a little sparkle. Here I've tied in a little crystal flash for a tail. Put dubbing loosely on your thread and wrap uniformly forward to the eye of the hook, trying to cover the weight without over-covering it. Ideally, you want some of the pink thread to barely show through when the fly is wet, giving a slight translucency to the fly. Check that you're comfortable with the covering of the weight and the spikiness of the fly. Unwind it and redo it if necessary. Put on a small head, whip finish twice, and you're through. It can't get much simpler than that. I'm sure you noticed that we didn't discuss the dubbing yet. The dubbing will determine the color and the spikiness. So what dubbing should you use? Classically, it has been mink dubbing, as the name implies, but likely muskrat, rabbit, or other would all work. You want the fly to sink, so mink or other oily furs may not be ideal, but that isn't an issue since this fly is weighted. I do use mink. I use light tans, browns, grays, and almost blacks. Remember that dubbing will get darker when it gets wet and as you fish it deeper. I think the spikiness may trap air and cause micro-movement, so I consider the spikiness important, but only rarely has the color seemed to be an issue. You may find some prepared dubbing with guard hairs that works well, but I like to make my own by cutting a piece of mink as close to the skin as possible to get a mixture of guard hairs and underlying fur. A small clump like this can be mixed by hand, but usually I cut more than this and place the clumps in a coffee grinder. Incidentally, I went most of my fly tying years using only commercially prepared dubbings, and they seem to work fine. But I've easily saved the money I spent on a coffee grinder by being able to prepare my own dubbings from otherwise wasted materials, and now I get to customize my dubbing by adding spikiness, antron flash, etc. as I desire. If you're a fairly avid fly tyer, watch at flea markets, thrift shops, etc., and buy a cheap coffee grinder if you get the chance. Dry mixing and adjusting your mix in a coffee grinder gives a nice even mixture and is a lot easier and faster than wet mixing with a blender that some suggest. Label a small plastic bag and save the mixed dubbing for future use. Okay, let's fish. To fish a fly correctly, I like to think I know what I'm trying to represent, but I doubt the trout always agree with me. The first time I caught lots of trout on the Minke, I was in great scud and sowbug water. The Minke did better than my shellback scuds, and I was sure I had found my go-to scud pattern. However, one day I was experimenting and tried it on a river that lacked scuds or sowbugs. It still worked well, although similar to my caddis larva imitation. Maybe it just represents something that's edible to the trout. So, the Minke seems to work well on many streams. If you've watched my series on fly fishing hatches, you realize that low-grade hatches are happening more commonly than we're aware of. During low-grade hatches, trout will take other organisms, and the Minke is large enough to get their attention. But if a hatch is heavy enough that it's apparent to me, some stage of the hatching organism is usually a better choice. I usually use the Minke as a searching pattern, especially on waters that hold lots of scowbugs or scuds. If the trout are active, the Minke usually works well enough to catch at least an occasional trout and perhaps learn what might be even a better choice, but most often the Minke is working so well that I just keep fishing with it. While bumping a dormant trout with a Minke may occasionally work, most of the time when trout are dormant, I either eat lunch, rest, or use a streamer. Since I'm most commonly using a Minke in a searching mode, trying to cover likely looking water, I may use it as a solo fly, especially if it has proven to be productive on those waters in the past. But when starting out, I commonly drop it off one of my other favorite searching nymphs. If I'm expecting a blue-winged olive emergence in a few hours, I use the Minke as the point fly and drop a small pheasant-tail nymph off of it. This is my usual starting rig, but I will vary the listed tippet and leader lengths depending on the depth and speed of the water. If I need more weight to get nearer the bottom of the stream, I'll add split shot. For years I've done this by putting the split shot above the point fly, usually just above the tippet knot. Last year I read about and tried leaving a tag end on my tippet knot. Then I tied a simple overhand knot near the end of the tag end and put a split shot just above it. My first impression was positive. I often lost only my split shot when I snagged the bottom rather than my entire rig. I will be trying more of this in the future. I use standard short line and long line nymphing techniques depending on the water type. Most commonly I'll be fishing upstream with an indicator. Getting your nymph deep quickly and learning how to mend your line without moving your indicator are the most critical factors. Most of the time when you move your indicator, you are also moving your nymph, pulling it higher in the water column than ideal. This shortens the effective drift. The movement may also cause refusals that you can't see, you just know that you're not catching any fish. Most use a tuck cast to get their nymph deep quickly. If you have a weighted nymph or a split shot on, a simple version of the tuck cast is to use a minimally overpowered cast slightly above horizontal, and the nymph will hook or tuck under the line. There are books and online videos that explain this technique far better than I could demonstrate. And practice underpowered roll casts to toss line on top of your indicator without moving it. Be sure to get adequate line out of your rod tip that you don't move the indicator while raising your rod tip to start the roll cast. You can practice on your lawn, which is worth doing. And after practicing on your lawn, it'll be much easier on the water due to the added surface tension. Using multiple roll cast mends can greatly improve the effective length of your drift. Basically learn good nymphing technique any way you can. Having another fisherman who is good at nymphing demonstrate for you is best, but books, videos, and lots of intelligent backyard practice can help. Learning to fish nymphs, including the Minke, will markedly improve the number and size of the trout you catch. Learning to fish streamers is another skill definitely worth learning. The Mini Neon is a small streamer that I can fish easily with my usual light trout fishing rod, so I use it more than other streamers, and it's very easy to tie. So in the next part of this series, We'll tie and fish one. I'm Raj Kletke, and I'll see you soon.